Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. With this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce RTX 4080 Super in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. This one is the Founders Edition model of the card. I am running it with the latest nvidia drivers and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in Tech Power-Ups GPU-Z, and over on the left, I'm pairing it with a Ryzen 9 7950X 3D CPU with half of its cores disabled, making it the same as a 7800X 3D, and on the memory tab, I'm using 32GB of RAM. Let's get into it, shall we? And here we have it. Let's go over the settings first. I am starting at 4K resolution, utilizing the Supreme settings over here. Okay, so pretty much everything is maxed out, aside from path tracing, which is now turned off. But of course, I will try it out later in this video as well. We're also utilizing DLAA as the super resolution method, which doesn't really upscale from any resolution. It's native resolution, just applying the anti-aliasing from DLSS, and frame generation is now turned off. And let's take a look at this and see how it runs. 80-something FPS, that's pretty good. Now, we got a lot of shadow popping and also object popping here in this game. If you aren't playing with path tracing or using some console commands, you can actually open the console right here and use some commands to make it pop in less, basically, or make it less noticeable. I'm gonna start counting our FPS as well. We're getting 70-ish frames per second, which is quite nice, you know. It's quite a bit faster as well than the 7900 XTX was in this title. I think that one was getting like 60s around here in the forest area. This is dropping to 60 now because of the cutscene, but it's not a major issue, guys. If you have the 7900 XTX GPU, it's still going to be above 60 FPS the entire time, so both of these can provide a very good experience in this title if you're not using path tracing. As you can see, like 70s here, this is basically where it drops the most, 68, 67. Yeah, it is completely stable. If you go to the city area, it gets higher FPS than these, probably like close to 100 FPS. I'm going to showcase that just real quick here, guys. Yeah, here we are getting 80s. Frame time graph is a little bit weirder now. Very spiky, just like I saw the 4060s frame time graph back when I tested that. That's pretty weird, actually. I don't know what's going on, but whenever the frame time graph is like that, you can just lock the FPS and it will stay flat all of the time without any stuttering issues. These are just micro stutters. Don't know why those happen. But anyway, yeah, it is a completely playable experience, obviously at 4K Supreme settings, as long as you don't play with the path tracing setting. But I'm back to this jungle area, which is a bit more intensive, of course, and I'm just gonna spend most of the time testing right here because, again, it's more intensive. So if 68 FPS plus or 67 FPS plus aren't enough for you in this title, there's always the option of utilizing DLSS, of course. You can use like DLSS quality, which is actually my recommendation for a 4080 Super at 4K resolution, because it looks really good still. It's basically the same visual quality as native 4K. I can't really tell much of a difference. Maybe there's like a little bit of ghosting somewhere or shimmering, like over there, for example, that wasn't there at native resolution, but it's so minor and you actually gotta be looking for it that I don't really care about that stuff. Okay, basically the difference in visuals is negligible, but the difference in performance isn't negligible at all. From 70 FPS to 100 plus FPS, it's kind of an insane boost, right? And it feels awesome right now. It feels high refresh rate, even though you're not going to max out 120 Hz monitor even. It still feels really, really smooth. Very, very stable and playable as well. There are some little spikes here and there in that frame time graph. Once again, we've seen those with the RTX 4090 as well. But, you know, those aren't really noticeable. And if they are to you, all you need to do is, again, lock your FPS, maybe set it to like 90 or 100, and it's always going to stay at 100 FPS without any fluctuations. Now, you can also utilize frame generation on top of quality DLSS if you want to get the fastest, highest refresh rate experience that you can get in this game. And here it is. 100 plus frames per second. I guess we gained what, like 20 FPS or something like that? Maybe not even 20 FPS. So it's not going to double your FPS like AFMF2, for example, on the AMD side of things, or the FSR FG, but the NVIDIA's frame generation still increases the FPS, of course, and it makes things a bit smoother. And now if we go to that CT area, by the way, I've been noticing that as soon as you enable frame generation, the frame time is completely flat. So if I disable this, alright, I'm gonna showcase that. If I disable DLSS frame generation and just have quality DLSS in place, you can see the frame time graph is slightly thicker, right? And that means that it's kind of micro stuttering here and there. But enabling frame generation fixes that completely. It makes it flat. It's really weird. Same thing happens, for example, in Microsoft Flight Simulator. I've seen it happen in a couple of other games as well. But yeah, it does smooth out your frame time, so you might want to enable frame generation in this one, even if you don't really need it, you know, like quality DLSS or even 4K native resolution with supreme settings without any path tracing already work extremely well, right? But anyway, if you don't care about the path tracing experience, this is definitely the way to go with the 4080 Super. Obviously, at lower resolutions, it will run even smoother. Like, I'm not going to test 1440p and 1080p without the path tracing here today, because you saw that even at native 4K, it's absolutely, completely stable. So we don't really need to waste time, basically, testing those resolutions. You already know it's going to be buttery smooth. Also, you can actually utilize frame generation over DLAA if you really want to. Alright, it's just gonna get like 90 frames per second. It's still playable, but then the input lag starts feeling a bit too bad, especially if you go to the other jungle area. Yeah, here the FPS are a bit lower and they drop into the 80s, and at 80 frames per second, the input lag is basically the same as half the frame rate, so you're getting like 40 to 50 FPS input lag, and it's noticeable, okay? I wouldn't really utilize this. Anyway, let's set it back to DLAA, disable frame generation, and play around with path tracing, guys. The extremely intensive setting of this game. Let's start with path tracing on medium, and instantly we're seeing 8 frames per second. Now this is happening because we actually ran out of VRAM. It swapped into the RAM, but it could possibly be because we were changing some settings on like the frame generation and so on that messes with VRAM, and I will restart the game to make sure that it is actually getting 8 FPS. It might only be getting 8 FPS because we were using a more VRAM because of the frame gen. And nope, it's still running out of VRAM. You can see the allocation there completely maxed out. What is this? Oh boy. Well, at least we get to see a slideshow of decent looking textures, I guess. Let's go to the option. If I can with 3 FPS, this is even worse now. Alright, so this was kind of expected because I've already tested the RTX 4090 in this game with path tracing, and I saw it using or allocating more than 16 gigabytes using these settings. So yeah, we can't really play like this. It's going to be completely unplayable, obviously, but we can adjust the texture pool size over here to make it run well on 16 gigabytes of VRAM. It's kind of crazy, right? That path tracing utilizes so much VRAM over what we saw without the path tracing. But yeah, to start off, this game already uses hardware ray tracing, as I said at the beginning. So that consumes a lot of VRAM, and then path tracing over that, I mean, yeah, path tracing is just a completely different beast. I think you should just disable path tracing in this game unless you have a 4090, because it is way too intensive. Even Cyberpunk, which has path tracing, says that that is an experimental feature. Alright, because it's really demanding, as you can see. I wish we could have some sort of shadow or ray traced shadows without them being path traced, because I feel like there should be an easier way to do this. Anyway, now we don't have as much shadow popping as before. Actually, there's 0 shadow popping whatsoever. There's still some differences in shadows, like as you can see over there, but that's because the LOD of the trees, for example, especially trees in this game, is super low. You can see it changing right there. It's pretty terrible. But yeah, in terms of the shadow popping, there's none now. It's super taxing on the GPU, guys, and I doubt anyone wants to spend $1,000 on a GPU like the 4080 Super to be playing at 40-ish FPS and 4K resolution. And I get that a lot of you will tell me, 4K gaming is not for the current GPUs. Every single time there's a new GPU series, at the beginning of their life, people start saying that they're good 4K GPUs. We finally have 4K gaming cards. And by the end of their life, whenever there's the new generation coming, people are saying, oh yes, these GPUs were never meant for 4K gaming. It's kind of crazy, you know. But yeah, the 4080 Super is a very strong GPU. It is way faster than even the 3090 Ti, okay? So that was a $2,500 GPU when it came out a couple of years ago. It's crazy, or 3 years ago maybe. Yeah, absolutely insane GPU consuming 450 watts. This is faster. Okay, and the 3090 and even 3080 were considered great 4K gaming GPUs back when they came out. Yeah, for those of you telling me that I shouldn't test 4K with these cards, come on. Anyway, moving on, let's enable quality DLSS over the path tracing medium settings and everything else on Supreme, aside from the textures. Yes, texture pool size, which is on high to prevent it from going over 16 gigabytes. And yeah, right now we're back to the same values, a little bit slower performance still, as we started with 4K native resolution without path tracing whatsoever. So it is getting 60 plus, as you can see, 61, 60 there. It might dip down into the 50s every once in a while in more intensive areas than this one, but honestly, guys, this area is very, very intensive. That's why I'm spending my time here. I wish it was a little bit bigger to explore, actually, because I feel like these videos become really repetitive, but hey, what can I do, right? Yeah, it's getting 60s, very close to dropping into the 50s, guys, but it's not yet dropping, fortunately. Look at that. I'm not even counting the FPS. I'm sorry. That's because I'm not spending a lot of time here. What the hell happened here?
All right, just a snake.
A snake, yes. It's just a snake. Like that's a small thing to be scared about. Now, if you enable frame generation over this also consumes a bit more VRAM, but I don't think it's going to run out of it because we got the high texture streaming or pool size, texture pool size, that's it. Yeah, it gets 80s, 90s once again, so about the same as DLAA with no path tracing and frame generation at native 4K, basically. So yeah, it's in terms of input lag, it's about the same. You're going to notice it very much. Since this is a single-player title, it might not matter too much, which, I mean, it's fine, especially if you play with a controller. But yeah, with mouse and keyboard, you can notice it, guys. It's not amazing, really. I wish it was a little bit better. But it's still smoother than just running quality DLSS. But you know what? I would probably choose to play with balanced DLSS here because in terms of visual fidelity, I also disabled DLSS frame generation at the moment, but in terms of visual fidelity, it's very similar to quality. You can notice a bit of noise creeping into the image, like over there, for example, on the water. There is a bit of noise, but I feel more comfortable and more confident knowing that I'm not dropping from 70 FPS than knowing that I'm into the 60s and low 60s at times. You know, it's still dropping into the 60s, as you can see there, but not by much. So this gives you a little bit more stability, a little bit more peace of mind, I would say. Anyway, obviously you can enable some frame generation over this if you want to, and then you'll get 100 FPS, so slightly better once again than what it was with quality DLSS plus FG here at 4K, with path tracing medium, of course. In terms of input lag, you can still notice it. It still drops into the 90s, so then it starts becoming pretty noticeable, actually. But that's down to personal preference as well. Some people will notice a lot of input lag, other people won't notice it whatsoever. For example, I have a friend playing Stalker 2 a lot lately, and he's playing with frame generation. He upgraded from the Ryzen 5 3600 to a 5700X 3D just for that game, and he's getting like 80 FPS now with frame generation enabled. in settlement areas, which are extremely intensive, sometimes down to 70 as well. I noticed a ton of input lag there, but he didn't care at all. I think that if I didn't tell him that there was input lag, he would never know what I was talking about. Normal people, am I right? Anyway, with performance DLSS at 4K, the game will now render at 1080p resolution and upscale to 4K. And I forgot to enable these settings right here, the performance metrics actually. You can see it right there. This is the native resolution, of course. The DLSS source is 1920 by 1080 res. So that means it's upscaling from that resolution, of course. And this is it, guys. It gets 70s and 80s. All right. That's a little bit smoother, of course, than balanced DLSS was. Obviously, that's what's meant to happen when you decrease DLSS quality. And in terms of the visuals, you can definitely notice it's a little bit softer on a 42-inch monitor, which is what I'm using here. But maybe on like a 32-inch, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference as much, at least. I would be needing to actually look very closely at things to be able to tell the difference. But yeah, if you are wondering if a 1080p display at native resolution would look better or worse than this DLSS performance at 4K resolution, this looks way better. It's night and day difference. The upscaling part of it does an impressive job, to the point where nvidia actually recommends performance DLSS for 4K gaming. Now let's enable frame generation over performance DLSS, and now we get 100 lower 100 still. Okay, so it's not that much better than balanced DLSS with frame generation. I thought we'd get like 110 plus or something like that, but that's not the case apparently. 15 gigabytes of VRAM allocation, everything's all right there. Yeah, getting lower 100s. Basically, it's going to be 100 plus FPS all of the time. So no drops into the 90s anymore. I would actually utilize performance DLSS plus frame generation, or maybe performance DLSS with locked 60 FPS. And that's actually how I played most of the game, to save a bit of power, because usually the 4090 consumes a lot of power, and I am a power conscious person. This is it, guys, for medium path tracing, and I think you should stick to medium path tracing, honestly. But if you really want more, there's always high path tracing, which makes it run out of VRAM. So now you gotta start lowering down that texture pool size setting, guys. This is extremely VRAM hungry at this point, basically, and I am actually going to set it too low. Okay, it's crazy, but yeah, you actually need to do this to play with high or full ray tracing path tracing. I'm gonna restart the game as well. Only after a restart it's going to become playable. Alright, this is it, guys. Path tracing is set to high. We got DLAA, no frame generation, 4K resolution, and the 4080 Super is already on its knees. Look at that, 20s. Yep, it is unplayable now. There's no way around it. It drops into the 20s, even if you wanted a 30 FPS experience for some reason. This is not doable. It's not going to happen with the 4080 Super. You actually need a 4090 if you want to play natively with 30 plus FPS with path tracing high in this game. This is what the path tracing does to you. See? Max settings without path tracing, 60 plus FPS. Path tracing high, not even maximum, 28 FPS. Crazy stuff, right? Now, obviously, it will start running way better with quality DLSS here. So now we're in the 40s and 50s, much more stable. VRAM isn't an issue at all since we got that low texture streaming budget or texture pool size, that's it in this game. So I don't think the VRAM will be an issue even at the full ray tracing settings from path tracing, the maximum, you know. But yeah, I set it too low just to be safe because I don't want to see single-digit FPS anymore. Alright? Don't like to see that. Anyway, you could play like this, yeah, but in terms of visual fidelity, it doesn't change anything actually inside of the jungle area. Where you're going to notice some differences is in the city area of the game. There you can see a lot of reflections that weren't there previously without the path tracing high setting enabled. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and select performance here right away because this is the way to get 60 plus FPS. As you can see, we're getting 60 to 70 now. No need for frame generation. Well, it might actually drop sometimes into the lower 60s or actually high 50s. Yeah, there we go, 59 over there. Let's go in this direction. I'm gonna check this out going from here to there. Yeah, it does drop 58, 57, a little bit more intensive. Okay, so it still drops a little bit into the 50s. Nothing that an overclock wouldn't fix, but then it consumes more power. And again, I do care about power usage, guys. Now we can enable, of course, DLSS frame generation over these baseline FPS of around 60. It will feel decent. Getting 90. Eh. It feels decent for sure. It's just that mouse and keyboard wise, you can feel a lot of input lag with 90 FPS. It's doable though, but I would just keep the reflections disabled. Just play with ray tracing medium or no ray tracing whatsoever with some console commands to increase the LOD, and that's the way to go with the RTX 4080 Super in my opinion. This is playable, it can definitely still be enjoyable, but the trade-off is the input lag basically to have some prettier reflections inside of town. That's just my opinion, of course. Let's disable this, go back to DLAA over here, and now I will choose full ray tracing settings. Yep, it works without needing to restart the game, as you can see. I'm still going to restart just in case, you know, but it's not going to change the FPS. I know it for sure. And well, guys, we're back here getting 20s. It's really bad. Obviously, like, it was really bad previously, so of course this is terrible. Now, with the full RT path tracing setting, we need DLSS performance. Like, I'm not even gonna attempt DLSS quality. It might get us 30 plus, but it's not going to be amazing. And even performance doesn't get 60 plus FPS. Doesn't even get 60 FPS, look at that. Maybe looking in its direction, nope. Still no 60 FPS, okay. Extremely intensive stuff right now, guys. It's kind of insane to think about this, but 3060 Ti in 2020 or 2021 games that I played back then, multiplayer shooters mostly like Battlefield 2042 and Warzone, those games with performance DLSS on that GPU with like high settings, they would do 60 plus FPS, like even 100 FPS or 80s or something, and this is a 4080 Super doing 50s. Obviously, again, those games were without ray tracing. But again, guys, I wish they made the game look better on Supreme settings without any path tracing and included path tracing just for us to check out the future, basically, and this insane technology, you know? Because to actually play with it, you gotta sacrifice a lot. Now, obviously, if you're okay with sacrificing input lag, it's going to be completely fine. Performance DLSS also is a little bit noisier than it was on quality or native, but it doesn't really matter too much, still looks good. And here we have it, 70s. Yeah, it's very intensive still, guys. And input lag this way is only going to be acceptable with the controller, really. With mouse and keyboard, I wouldn't do this. But alright, that's been it for 4K resolution, guys. It's already a huge video. Oh my gosh, that's a bunch of settings to test, you know. Last time around, my voice wasn't working properly anymore. I had like a sore throat. And I'm starting to have that now already. Anyway, let's turn off DLSS frame generation, turn this back into DLAA, turn off the full ray tracing as well, get this up to Supreme again, yes, not very ultra, and go down to 1440p resolution. And well, at 1440p, we're starting off with 100 frames per second here. It's very smooth, very playable. Obviously, again, the pop-in issue is still there. There are commands to fix it. Go watch Digital Foundry's video about it because they go over it. And yeah, you can make that pop-in issue disappear, basically, which is very nice. And yeah, look at that. It's never dropping from 100 FPS. Frame time is not amazing, so what I do is either lock the FPS or play with frame generation. No need to use quality DLSS, obviously. And when you use frame generation, you're up into the 140s. It's going to be an even smoother experience, of course, for a high refresh rate 1440p monitor. And input lag-wise, at 140 FPS, is pretty negligible for a single-player game. I wouldn't really care about it. And I don't, honestly. So I'd be completely fine with this experience. I think the main benefit of enabling frame generation at this point in time in this current patch of the game or update of the game, version of the game that is the fact that it actually gives you that smooth frame time graph. So let's disable frame generation. Let's enable full ray tracing. I think, look at that VRAM. It went up instantly by a lot. But okay, let's try it out on medium first with native 1440p. All right. So at native 1440p, it's working way better than I thought it would. Because with quality DLSS at 4K resolution, it was still a bit rough, right? And that's because the upscaling part of DLSS is still intensive, you know? It's not, you're not going to get the same FPS as 1080p with 4K performance DLSS. It's just not going to happen. It's always going to be a bit more intensive than that. But yeah, over here with the DLAA at 1440p, things aren't even dropping from 60 FPS. So we can actually run native resolution above 60 FPS with path tracing enabled. That's pretty impressive. Obviously, that's because we got a lot of headroom at this resolution. We started with 100 plus frames per second, so enabling this at the native resolution dropped this 50 frames per second, which is a heck of a lot, but that wasn't enough to put us below 60 FPS. So this is the end result, guys. You can run this natively. And obviously that means that enabling frame generation over it will still feel decent since the baseline FPS were good. Yeah, hundreds and 90s. The 90s stuff, I don't like too much. But whenever it's 100 plus, it feels pretty decent in terms of that input lag once again. Also, if you're wondering, DLSS quality plus frame generation at the same time, 1440p, 130s. Pretty crazy stuff, but then it starts being noticeable, you know, the degradation to the image quality by the use of DLSS. So I wouldn't really do this. But let's check out high path tracing. Okay, it's still not running out of VRAM, thankfully. All right, so now it's starting to drop from 60 FPS, of course, probably even from 50 FPS in some scenarios. Like look in that direction. Yep, 47 there. Yeah, it's definitely a lot more intensive right now with those RT reflections enabled or path trace reflections enabled as well. 45, 44. That's extremely intensive once again. Holy. Well, we need help here. We need help from the upscaler. I wouldn't use frame generation with a baseline of 50 once again, so let's just use quality DLSS. And with quality DLSS, it's well above 60 once again. You can enable frame generation over this, achieve 100 plus frames per second, or 100 probably on average. And yeah, it's decent this way, as you can see, 70s. Doesn't even drop into the 60s very often. 69 there, 68, 66. Let's check out this area over here. Come on, Indy. Don't get tired so quickly. We can do this. Let's go. Look in that direction. 66 once again. Now let's enable FG over these settings. And VRAM still enough, thankfully. And we're up into the 110s. So if you want quality DLSS plus FG, it's going to work pretty well with the 4080 Super. Even with path tracing high over here, guys. Not a problem whatsoever, and it shouldn't be because this is a very expensive card once again. But let's go back to DLAA and let's change this to full RT. And it didn't run out of VRAM yet, I think. If it has, at least it didn't affect our frame rate, so that's fine. And this is it. Native 1440p, ray tracing enabled, or path tracing maxed out, basically. Yeah, it's pretty insane, guys. It's getting 30s. It's still native resolution, though, so you could play like this, I guess. It's not dropping from 30 FPS, but it is very rough, right? Anyway, let's use quality DLSS here. This improves things by a lot, once again. It puts us up into the 50s and 60s at times. That means that in the city, for example, it would be 60 plus. But now we're essentially playing the game at 960p resolution, as you can see on the right on-screen display. It's 1707 by 960. And yeah, it's just a little bit too low of a resolution, obviously, for a 4080 Super, right? It just doesn't sound right to say that you're playing at 960p with a 4080 Super. And now enabling the frame generation over this puts us in the 90s. I thought it was going to be 100 FPS minimum or something, but no, it's still in the 90s. God damn. Still smooth though, very playable, but again, that input lag starts creeping into the game, and if you don't get used to it, or if you can't get used to it, it's gonna suck, basically. So I would avoid this, okay? At least that's my opinion. I would much rather drop the path tracing settings than play with frame generation in 90-something FPS, but that's up to you. Obviously, in the city, it will be above 100 FPS, and you're gonna spend more time there than here in the jungle. So, you know, trade-offs. But I don't like to make trade-offs when I'm spending so much on a GPU. And that's also why I believe Cyberpunk has nailed it by putting ray tracing low, ray tracing medium, ray tracing ultra presets, and then a path tracing preset. Because only having path tracing, that just kills performance completely. And lastly, guys, I got 1080p resolution, but I'll keep this shorter than the other two resolutions, because not many people are playing at 1080p with this GPU, I think. And if you are, maybe you're gonna go for full ray tracing settings anyways, because if you play at 1080p with such an expensive card, I think you're willing to do it to have ray tracing at native resolution, right? And if that's the case, with full RT, we can finally have a somewhat playable experience. Sometimes it reaches 60 FPS. Not very often, though, at least in the jungle area. But I feel like, again, in the city area, which I'm going to right now, it is indeed above 60 FPS. Getting 69, or very close to 69 right there. I think maybe if we start counting the FPS, we might get 69 FPS average. It's pretty good. I mean, obviously, it's 1080p resolution, and I would never do this with this GPU once again. But if you are one of those people who insist in playing at 1080p resolution, even with a GPU this strong, well, it does get 60 plus FPS in most of the game, at least. Hello, Jack. How's it going, buddy? Looking pretty good, actually. Damn. The fur, even like 1080p. It doesn't even look like 1080p, honestly. Yeah, it's looking pretty decent in terms of anti-aliasing and so on, and shimmering. Like, for some reason, this doesn't look like 1080p in other games. Maybe path tracing is doing something weird, but yeah, it's kind of insane. Also, this is the reflections that I was telling you about. Those reflections on the door as well. These go away completely, and it starts looking like this, basically, if you disable the RT reflections. Like, it is like that blue glow goes away completely. It's crazy. Little bit of frame time issues, though, which will go away with the frame generation. Once again, to that guy who told me I was crazy and an idiot and stupid for saying that frame generation smooths things out, look at the frame time now. Look at the frame time. Look at that. Look at that. Did you see that? Did you see the thick frame time? Let's go. Let's go. Turn it on. No more thick frame time. I like it when I'm right in these scenarios and they tell me that I'm stupid. But yeah, guys, with frame generation here at 1080p resolution, it goes up to 100 plus frames per second. It looks pretty good as well at the same time. But again, it's 1080p. I wouldn't use this. With the 4080 Super, you're better off utilizing the medium preset on path tracing, or just disabling it altogether and utilizing some LOD trickery to make the game look better in terms of shadow popping, which is extremely annoying. It's probably the most annoying thing about this game ever. Anyway, it gets 200 FPS without the path tracing, and with frame generation, of course. If you disable frame generation, it gets 130s. Pretty insane. Still high refresh rate, no problems. Of course, it's 1080p resolution. Right, and that's been it for this video. My voice is tired already. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Bob, what do you want? Stop it. Goodbye, Bob. There we go. Stop throwing things at me. Also, oh, shut up. Shut up. The blue glow. Remember the blue glow? My God. Shut up. Stop it, Jack! Why? No, this is not Jack, of course. Yeah, this is a bad boy. The blue glow on the ground is gone. The glow on the doors is gone because path tracing is also gone at this point. Thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one. Love you all. Bye-bye.